Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for all the graces and blessings you've given to us. Bless our teachers, our school, our nation, and bless us. Help us understand our lesson, control our whole being, and we give ourselves to you. This we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen. Christian Filipino Muslim relation. Next, please. So this is the historical background of Islamic religion. Sulu, Maguindanao, and Buayan are the three principalities existed in the southern part of the Philippine archipelago during the third quarter of the 16th century. These three represented a unit of scores of settlement under a paramount datu or chief. So, kaning tulo ka principalities ipamunuan og chief or datu. Under the Sulu Sultanate were Jolo, Tawi-Tawi, Cagayan, Basilan, and including neighboring island which includes Zamboanga. The lower valley of Pulangi, Iliana, Sibugay Bays were under the Maguindanao, while the upper valley of Pulangi and part of Talayan were controlled by the Buayan. Next. During this period, the chiefs, leading families, and a great part of inhabitants of the principalities were Islamized. In 1565, the Spaniards were able to control most of the barangays in Luzon and Visayas areas, whose inhabitants are mostly pagans, but they failed to control Mindanao, which have been Islamized. In fact, if Spaniards did not come, the whole Philippines could have been Islamized. It is stated here that the Philippines could have been an Islamic country if ever Spaniards did not came, which is apparently good for Christians. But if ever they did not came, we should accept the fact that Philippines is an Islamic country. Next, please. So, why did the Spaniards fail in their attempt to conquer and convert Muslims to Christians? A Filipino historian, Cesar Majul, wrote something about this failure. He said, next, the Muslims had an ideology that was competitive in character, and it had become intimately intertwined with patriotism. Their political system were more advanced than those up north. Moreover, neighboring Muslim principalities often provide them with aid in the defense. The Spaniards came with a deep hatred of Islam and a determination to extirpate it from the island. Muslims were competitive in the past, but it is hard for Spaniards to colonize Mindanao. The Spaniards also found their own allies and can defend them, and that was the Spaniards became more competitive and want to colonize Mindanao also. Next, please. Majul pointed out that the series of wars between the Spaniards and the Muslims were motivated by religion and economic interest both of the part of the Muslims and the Spaniards. The Westerners wanted supremacy in the trade in the Malay lands, and Majul said, the coming of the Westerners conversely represented a danger to Western Asian Muslim traders as well as the local trade between the Malays. The religious zeal of the Christian arose a counter-zeal among the Muslims. Both parties look at the conflict as a situation of the Crusades. Next. Phases of the Moro Wars by Cesar Adibmajul, lifted from the Moro Wars. Next. Before we start, we should know about Cesar Adibmajul. He was a Filipino historian who was best known for his work and researcher on the history of Islam in the Philippines. He obtained his education from the University of the Philippines and Cornell University. He was Dean of the College of Arts and Science of the University of the Philippines, and, and was recipient of the Republic Heritage Award for his outstanding contribution to historical writing. Majul died in the United States on 2003. Next. Phase 1. Brunei cut off. First phase of the war began around the coming of the Gaspi in 1565 and ended with the invasion of Borneo in 1578 and 1581. On March 1565, the Spaniards captured a trading vessels in Bohol. In 1569, Spanish trading successfully engaged 20 vessels owned by Borneans and Sulu, symbolized commercial rivalry. Next. After the capture of Manila, the Spaniards were concerned about disgruntled Bornean aristocracy that they may seek aid in Brunei. In 1578, Spaniards invaded Brunei and forced Sultan Siforgiral to flee. The Spaniards returned in 1581 but was unsuccessful, but they succeed in eliminating Bornean pretension in the country. Significant event. The people of Brunei and Sulu were allies. The sultans were brothers-in-law. Phase 2. Strongholds. The second phase started when the Spaniards tried to establish forts and colonies in Muslim lands to exact tribute from the Muslim and to win them from their alliance to Ternate. Sulu Sultan paid a modest tribute, so did the chieftains in the Pulangi. A 1585 conspiracy of Tondo chieftains led by Magat Salamat failed. In 1591, the Spanish government decided to colonize Mindanao and incorporate it into its Philippines colony. April 1596, Esteban Rodriguez de Figueroa, newly designated governor of Mindanao, landed in Cotabato but failed to contract Maguindanao Sultan. He was struck on the head of Campilan. The second phase ended with the defeat of the Spanish invaders. Next. Significant event. The Ternatan aid came not only on account or kinship relation between the families of Mindanao and the Moluccas and religion ties, but the Ternatans realized that if Mindanao become a Spanish base, it will have operation against them. This is the parts of Moro Campilan. It is a sword. Next. Phase 3. Counterattacks. The third phase began in 1599 to 1600s when the Maguindanaon launched an offensive against the Spanish forces in the Visayas. However, the Spaniards later succeeded in conquering Ternate. In 1635, the Spaniards established a strong fort in Zamboanga. Significant events. Sulu, Maguindanao, and Buhayan had Ternatan aids. The Dutch helped and encouraged the Muslims to create more difficulties for their Spanish rivals. 1599 to 1600, Rahas of Mindanao and Buhayan launches raids in the Visayas with 3,000 warriors each. They launched another raid in 1602, this time with the help of Sulu, and reached as far as southern Luzon. Uwisan, the Maguindanao Raha, attacked Visayas town. He returned some captives and gold and exhorted the Tatus to sweep off the Spaniards. 1606, one of the biggest fleets by the Spaniards went to Ternate, resulting to their victory and the Sultan captured. The Rahas of Pulangi made peace with the Spaniards in the fear of attacks against them. In 1616, the presence of Dutch in Philippine waters encouraged the Sulu to attack as far as Cavite and Camarines. In 1627, the Sulu attacked the shipyard in Camarines led by Raha Bongsu. The Spaniards retaliated, resulting to complete burning of Sulu and destruction of Sultan fleet. In 1630, an expedition led by Lorenzo de Olazo failed, leaving him wounded and his men killed. Rise of Kachil Kudarat. Kachil Kudarat, the leader of the Iranan and Maguindanao, became a chieftain in 1619 and kept the peace with the Spaniards, allied with the Dutch, who helped him with ammunition, and keep up with his commercial activities. In 1634, he attacked the Visayas to weaken the Spaniards. In 1635, Spaniards built a fort in Zamboanga for protection in the Mission and Mindanao, an outpost where Muslim fleet movement could be watched. Notes to consider. Muslim captured Spaniards for ransom purpose, as did the Spaniards when they captured Muslim leaders. Muslim enslaved the natives from the Spaniards. Next. Significant events. The Muslims in the Philippines were helped by neighboring principalities. These alliances represented not only marriage ties between families, but a concerted effort against the intrusion of Western imperialism, colonialism, and Christianity. Phase 4. Fortress War. Began with the fortification of Zamboanga in 1635 and ended to its abandonment in 1663. Governor Corcuera's task to capture Kudarat and put Spanish puppet in the Maguindanao Sultanate, to capture the main kota of Sulu and establish colonies there, to invade Brunei once again and put it under Spanish sovereignty. Conqueror captured Lamitan in 1637 and invaded neighboring towns despite strong defenses. The next year, 600 Spaniards and 1,000 native allies sieged Sulu Sultan Kota in Holo despite the super weak defense. An epidemic forced the Sultan to surrender. Spanish attempts to subject the Maranaos was short-lived and pacifying the Buayanons was difficult. Policy of the Spaniards: destroying all Muslim orchards, plantation, and sea crafts, depopulating Muslim and enslaving as many Muslim as possible. But Kudarat's gaining strength forced the Spaniards to make a treaty in 1645. The next year, they concluded a treaty pledging to abandon all forts in Sulu. In 1655, the peace was broken when the Spanish ambassador was assassinated in his insistence to convert the Sultan. Kudarat declared he had jihad and asked the aid of Sultan Makassar, Sulu, Ternate, and Brunei. In 1663, Zamboanga was abandoned, an interlude of peace for the next 50 years. Phase 5. The Spanish king issued various royal orders for the occupation and refortification of Zamboanga. The fort was garrisoned in 1718 and made stronger than before. The fifth phase was to commence. 1720 to 1721. Sulu and Iranan attacked the fort but failed despite the use of hundreds of war vessels and thousands of warriors. Spanish changed the program of evangelization in exchange for commercial relations and treaties of alliance. The sultanates shall accept the preaching of Christianity. Sultan Azim-ud-Din visited Manila for his baptism, imprisonment, and return to Sulu. The Sultan went as far as to seek aid from China and Ottoman Empire to protect Jolo from Spanish forces. In this phase of war, hundreds of Muslims were carried into captivity. Hundreds of Christian natives were captured and sold as slaves in Makassar and Java. Muslim raids in the Visayas were fierce. The Muslims remained unconquered and began to accelerate their commercial activities with the British. Phase 6. The British and the Dutch were extending in the lands of Southeast Asia. The Spaniards had to secure the southern frontier. The sixth phase of the wars commenced when the Spaniards utilized the existence of piracy to launch in 1845 and Balanging expedition. These led to the population of Salamis Island and transfer of survivors to Luzon of conversion. Another Spanish campaign in 1876 to capture Jolo was intended. This time used Sultan Jami-ul Azam's ignorance to previous treaties as an excuse. The war was a just and holy one against the wicked sons of the Quran by Spanish clergy. Upon abandonment of Jolo, the Sultan leased the Sabah territory to the British Company. A treaty among Britain, Germany, and Spain finally provided the Spanish sovereignty extended to Sulu. The last peace treaty between the Spaniards and the Sulu entered in 1878. The treaty provided a sort of Spanish protectorate for Sulu, while giving the Sulu a great deal of autonomy. However, the Tus and their followers kept on harassing the Spaniards, making Jolo a town under siege. A few expeditions were sent by Spaniards to the Maranao areas and Buayan to consolidate their hold in their lands. Cotabato became a Spanish outpost, and Spaniards were able to build forts along the Balang. Sultan Anwar-ud-Din Datu Uto was the only opposing force against the Spaniards.
So this is the continuation of Ms. Rizela Gamit report. No longer kins but enemies. The Spaniards failed in their vigorous attempts to dislodge Islam in Mindanao. Islamic culture prevailed in the island. The Muslims maintained their independence. So, gayunpaman, ang kanilang material at mga human resources ay nagdusa dahil sa mga ekspedisyong Espanyol na kailangan nilang labanan upang manatiling malaya. When Emilio Aguinaldo proclaimed the independence of the Philippines on June 12, 1898, the Muslims asserted their authority over the lands taken by the Spaniards. The conflict between the Muslims and the Christian Filipinos started when they refused to recognize the authority of the revolutionary government and started to look out at the Christian Filipinos with distrust. When the Filipino-American War escalated in Luzon and in the Visayas, the Americans faced strong resistance from the natives of these islands. So when they already know that the Muslims had a strong distrust against the Christian Filipinos, they took advantage to prevent them from joining the forces of the Filipinos in Luzon and in the Visayas. U.S. General John C. Batty succeeded in convincing the Sultan of Sulu, Jamalul Kiram II, to sign a treaty on August 20, 1899, the Battis-Kiram Treaty, which the United States promised to respect and guarantee the integrity of the Moro states if the Moros would remain neutral. However, the Americans did not respect the agreement, but the Moros did not give up their territories easily. With the Filipino-American War over, the Americans executed their plans for Mindanao. They introduced new laws which were detrimental to the welfare of the Muslims, most specifically on land ownership. So with the new laws, the Muslims lost their rights to their ancestral lands tungod sa ilang mga bagong ipatupad nga mga batas. So nawad-an sila og rights sa ilang own nga lands. Public Act 718, issued on April 4, 1903, which voided all property and acreage of Mindanao Sultans unless these pieces of property had been recognized as the sultanates by the colonial government. The next law is the Public Act 926, issued on October 7, 1903, declaring all unregistered land tracts as public domain and open for homestead. And the next law is the Public Land of 1919, appropriated a maximum of 10 hectares in homestead lots to Muslim Filipinos and 24-hectare lots to non-Muslim Filipinos. So homeless families from Luzon and the Visayas were encouraged to migrate in Mindanao, which intensified the hatred the Muslims had been harboring against their Christian brothers since the Spanish colonization. Since then, the Muslims and the Christian Filipinos treat each other as enemies. So, the third is a never-ending search for peace. As a result of discrimination and marginalization felt by the indigenous Muslim population in the southern Philippine island of Mindanao, an independence movement was founded in Mindanao. And it aimed at separating the Muslim-majority Moros areas from the rest of the country. In 1969, the Moro National Liberation Front was founded by Noor Miswari. Its armed resistance aimed at establishing a self-determining Moro identity in the Bangsa Moro, or a Muslim nation, started in 1972. MNLF splintered into the Mindanao Islamic Liberation Front after the final agreement for the implementation of the 1976 Tripoli Agreement was signed between the MNLF and the Government of the Republic of the Philippines, or the GRP. The MNLF continued the resistance, which resulted in thousands of deaths and displacement of more than 3 million people. Another breakaway group is the Bangsa Moro Islamic Freedom Fighters, which made the Mindanao situation more serious. So from President Ferdinand Marcos to President Rodrigo Duterte, peace for Mindanao has been a dream that remains elusive. So peace in the southern Philippine region of Mindanao remains elusive despite the continuous hard work of advocates on the ground. Each administration reached out to the Muslim insurgents, but the conflict in Mindanao seems never to end. Under the Marcos administration, peace negotiation resulted in the signing of the Tripoli Agreement between the MNLF and the government of the Republic of the Philippines. The negotiation, which resulted in the Tripoli Agreement brokered by Muammar Gaddafi, were participated in the quadripartite ministerial commission, members of the Islamic Conference, and the Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Conference. But hope springs eternal about peace. So, this degree of autonomy was provided for under the third section provision number 16 of the agreement, which states the government of the Philippines shall take the necessary constitutional process for the implementation of the entire agreement. So this agreement granted a degree of autonomy to the Moro. In order to carry out this provision, President Marcos issued PD number 1618 in July 1979, which implemented the autonomy of Region 9 and 12. However, many Moro groups were not satisfied with the degree of autonomy granted to this region. So when Mrs. Corazon Aquino became president in 1986, her government resumed peace. The peace process was revived. A unilateral declaration of ceasefire on the part of the government was done. In 1989, RA 6734, an organic act for the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, ARMM, was passed, and on November 6, 1990, the ARMM was formally established during the presidency of Ms. Corazon Aquino. The next presidency is under the Fidel Ramos presidency. Peace negotiations resume. And the agreement was intended as a two-stage process. So the first process is the phase 1, was a transition period for 3 years wherein the MNLF elements would join with the armed forces of the Philippines and the region would go an intensive socio-economic rehabilitation. So the next process is the phase 2, was considered of the devolution of powers and the repeal of the Organic Act. So the agreement, however, was acceptable only to the MNLF. So Ramos negotiated with the MILF exploratory talks between the government and the MILF started in August 1996, which commenced in January 1997. The peace initiative started by the Ramos was set aside by President Joseph Estrada when he adopted a policy of all-out war against the MILF in October 1999. So when the Philippine flag was raised in the rebel stronghold area of Abubakar, President Estrada saw to it that he was present to personally congratulate the soldiers. So from President Ferdinand Marcos to Fidel Ramos, the peace was resumed, but when the presidency of Joseph Estrada, so he set aside the peace negotiations. Instead, he adopted the policy of all-out war against the MILF. This all-out war policy of the Estrada administration was reversed by President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo with her all-out peace policy against the rebel groups in Mindanao. The peace process was revived. A unilateral declaration of ceasefire on the part of the government was done, assisted by the government of Malaysia. So on March 31, 2001, Republic Act 9054, which amended the Organic Act of the ARMM, lapsed into law without the signature of President Arroyo. So this law amended the Organic Act of the ARMM, expanding the region from the original 4 provinces under its jurisdiction. Mrs. Arroyo never tired hoping for the possibility of having peace in Mindanao. Another round of formal tasks between the government and the MILF was carried out on May 6, 2022, which resulted in an agreement between the two parties to veto criminal syndicates and kidnap for ransom groups in Mindanao. Peace negotiations resumed in February 2010 under the Benigno Aquino III administration. And on October 15, 2012, the Aquino government signed the Framework Agreement on the Bangsamoro, so a document which provided for a general framework for the actual peace negotiations. And President Aquino believed that the agreement would finally seal genuine, lasting peace in Mindanao. So in mid-2015, a CAB-compliant BBL was supposed to be approved in the Philippines Congress, but the infamous Mama Sapano tragedy in January 2015, when 44 members of the Special Action Force or the SAF of the Philippine National Police and 24 individuals including women and children lost their lives during the execution of Oplan Exodus. So this tragic incident made the members of the House of Representatives withdraw their support to the first version of the CAB-compliant BBL. "4 years on the cry for justice for the slain of 44 Special Action Force or the SAF troopers in what was dubbed as the Mama Sapano massacre remains elusive as ever to date. So the tragic loss of SAF 44 is a lesson learned we must not forget. So in June 2016, President Rodrigo Roa Duterte took over the reign of government from President Benigno Aquino III. A new Bangsamoro Transition Commission was created in 2016, tasked to draft a new version of the BBL which would be inclusive of the MNLF and the MILF, as well as representatives of the government and the indigenous peoples. When a new version of the new BBL was about to be submitted, the Marawi siege happened. So for 5 months, Marawi was bombed, which destroyed almost all the infrastructures of the city. So the terrorist Islamauti group launched massive attacks on the military forces of the government. Martial law was declared in Mindanao. As a result of this incident, the new BBL version suffered lukewarm support from the Philippine legislators.
Before I start, allege part of business. Briefly activity that the current fund extent for the fulfillment of the rights, regulation of the Muslim population in the Philippines in order to place. The current armed conflict started in the late 1960s when a Muslim armed group, Moro National Liberation Front or MNLF, started to advocate for a Moro homeland. The Philippine government responded through military means, resulting in numerous deaths among and displacement of the civilian population or Muslims as well as Christians. In the late 1970s, the Philippine government initiated peace talks and obtained a peace agreement with the main Muslim armed opposition group or the MNLF to stop the conflict and address the problems. To emphasize their deep sense of independence as a people, sorry sa manok guys, taba kayo sila. Many Muslims in Mindanao collectively call themselves Moro, the word used by the colonial Spanish government to refer to the Muslim people. This extends to the use of the word Bangsamoro or Moro nation to indicate a people separate from the rest of the Philippine population. The resulting armed conflict from the early 1970s created a major crisis in Mindanao and in the Philippines as a whole. In December 1976, the Philippine government signed an agreement with the MNLF through the intercession of the Organization of Islamic Conference or the OIC. This agreement, known as the 1976 Tripoli Agreement, and this is the topic that I am going to discuss. Ministerial, Commission members of the Islamic Conference and the Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Conference. In accordance, Resolution of Number 4, Paragraph 5, adopted by the Council of Ministers of the Islamic Conference in its fourth session held in Benghazi, Libyan Arab Republic during the month of Safar 1393H, corresponding to March 1973, calling for the formation of quadripartite ministerial commission representing the Libyan Arab Republic, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Republic of Senegal, and the Republic of with the government of the Republic of the Philippines concerning the situation of the Muslims in the south of the Philippines. So sa Resolution number 4 paragraph 5, dito tinatalakay ang tungkol sa sitwasyon ng mga Muslims sa south of the Philippines. Ito ay ginanap sa Benghazi, Libyan Arab Republic. In accordance with the resolution number 18 adopted by the Islamic Conference held in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia and Humada ala 1393H corresponding to June 1974 AD. So AD means Anno Domini or Anno Domini in Latin word. In English, it is in the year of the Lord, which recommends the searching for a just and peaceful political solution to the problem of the Muslims in the south of the Philippines through the negotiations. So, sa resolution number 18, ito ay nagre-rekomenda ng mga paghanap para sa isang makatarungan at mapayapang solusyon ng pampolitika sa problema ng mga Muslim sa south of the Philippines sa pamamagitan ng negosasyon. Next is, and in accordance with the resolution number 12-7S adopted by the Islamic Conference held in Istanbul in Humada El Ola 1396H corresponding to May 1976 AD, empowering the quadripartite ministerial commission and the Secretary General of the Islamic Conference to take the necessary steps for the resumption of negotiations. So sa resolution number 12-7S naman, ito ay nagbibigay ng kapangyarihan sa Quadripartite Ministerial Commission at sa Secretary General of the Islamic Conference na kunin ang mga kailangang hakbang para ipagpatuloy ang negosasyon. And in a realization of the contents of Para 6 or Paragraph 6 of the Joint Communique issued in Tripoli on the 25th Zulqa'dah 1396H, corresponding to 17 November 1976 AD, following the official visit paid by the delegation of the government of the Philippines, headed by Mrs. Imelda R. Marcos, to the Libyan Arab Republic, and which calls for the resumption of negotiations between the two parties concerned of December 1976 AD. So sa katuparan, sa content ng paragraph 6 na sinundan ng opisyal na pagbisita na ginawa ng delegasyon ng pamahalaan ng Pilipinas na pinamunuan ni Mrs. Imelda R. Marcos sa Libyan Arab Republic na nagtatawag ng pagpapatuloy na negosasyon between the two parties concerned in Tripoli on the 15th of December 1976 AD. Negotiations were held in the city of Tripoli during the period between 24th Zulhijjah 1396 to 2nd to Muharram 1397 corresponding to the period from 15th to 23rd December 1976 AD, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs presided over by Dr. Ali Abdul Salam Triki, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of the Libyan Arab Republic, and comprising of the delegations of Number 1 is Government of the Republic of the Philippines, led by Honorable Carmelo Z. Barbero, Undersecretary of National Defense for Civilian Relations. Number 2, Moro National Liberation Front, led by Mr. Noor Miswari, Chef of the front, and with the participation of the representatives of the tripartite ministerial commission. The Libyan Arab Republic represented by Dr. Ali Abdul Salam Triki, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, H.E. Salah Abdallah El Fadl, Ambassador of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Libyan Arab Republic. The Republic of Senegal, Mr. Abubakar Othman C., Representative of the Republic of Senegal and charged the affairs of Senegal in Cairo. Democratic Republic of Somalia, Libyan Arab Republic. So with the aid of H.A. Dr. Amadou Karim Gaite, Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Conference, and a delegation from the Secretariat General of the Conference composed of Mr. Qasim Zuhairi, Assistant Secretary General, and Mr. Arif Ben Musa, Director of Political Department. During these negotiations, which were marked by spirit of conciliation and understanding, it has been agreed on the following. So sa panahon ng mga delegasyong ito na minarkahan ng diwa ng pagkakasundo at pagkakaunawaan, ito ay napagkasunduan sa mga sumusunod. First, the establishment of autonomy in the southern Philippines within the realm of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of the Philippines. So, autonomy means the right or condition of self-government. Second, the areas of the autonomy for the Muslims in the southern Philippines shall comprise the following. So, these are Basilan, Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, Zamboanga del Sur, Zamboanga del Norte, North Cotabato, Maguindanao, Sultan Kudarat, Lanao del Norte, Lanao del Sur, Davao del Sur, South Cotabato, and Palawan. Third, number 1, foreign policy should be of the competence of the central government of the Philippines, issued by the President of the Republic of their appointments, taking into consideration all necessary qualifications of the candidates. Number 4, authorities of the autonomy in the south of the Philippines shall have the right to set up schools, colleges, and universities, provided that matter pertaining to the relationship between these educational and scientific organs and the general education system in the state shall be subject or discussed later on. Number 5, the Muslims shall have their own administrative system in compliance with the objectives of the autonomiad its institutions. The relationship between this administrative system and the central administrative system shall be discussed later. Number 6. The authorities of the autonomy in the south of the Philippines shall have their own economic and financial system. The relationship between this system and the central economic and financial system shall be discussed later. Number 7. The authorities of the autonomy in the south of the Philippines shall enjoy the right of representation and participation in the central government and in all other organs of the state. The number of the representatives and ways of participation shall be fixed later. Number 8. Special regional security forces are to be set up in the area of the autonomy for the Muslims in the south of the Philippines. The relationship between these forces and the central security forces shall be fixed later. Number 9. A legislative assembly and an executive council shall be formed in the areas of the autonomy for the Muslims. The setting up of the legislative assembly shall be constituted through a direct election, and the formation of the executive council shall take place through appointments by the legislative assembly. A decree for their formation shall be enacted by the President of the Republic respectively. The number of members of each assembly shall be determined later on. Number 10. Mines and minerals resources fall within the competence of the central government, and a reasonable percentage deriving from the revenues of the mines and minerals be fixed for the benefit of the areas of the autonomy. Number 11. A mixed committee shall be composed of the representatives of the central government of the Republic of the Philippines and the representatives of the Moro National Liberation Front. The mixed committee shall meet electrically during the period from the 5th of February to a date not later than the 3rd of March 1977. The task of said committee shall be charged to study in detail the points left for discussion in order to reach a solution thereof in conformity with the provision of this agreement. 12. Ceasefire shall be declared immediately after the signature of this agreement, provided that its coming into effect should not exceed the 20th January 1977. A joint committee shall be composed of the two parties with the help of the Organization of the Islamic Conference represented by the quadripartite ministerial commission to supervise the implementation of the ceasefire. The joint committee shall also be charged with supervising the following. A complete amnesty in the areas of the autonomy and the renunciation of all legal claims and codes resulting from the events which took place in the south of the Philippines. B. The release of all the political prisoners who had relations with the events in the south of the Philippines. C. The return of all refugees who have abandoned their areas in the south of the Philippines. And D. To guarantee the freedom of movements and meetings. 13. A joint meeting be held in Jeddah during the first week of the month of March 1977 to initial what has been concluded by the committee referred to in paragraph 11. 14. The final agreement concerning the setting up of the autonomy referred to in the first and second paragraphs shall be signed in the city of Mana, Republic of the Philippines, between the government of the Philippines and Moro National Liberation Front and the Islamic Conference represented by the quadripartite ministerial commission and the Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Conference. 15. Immediately after the signature of the agreement in Manila, a provisional government shall be established in the areas of the autonomy to be appointed by the President of the Philippines and be charged with the task of preparing for the elections of the Legislative Assembly in the territories of the autonomy and administer the areas in accordance with the provisions of this agreement until a government is formed by the elected Legislative Assembly. 16. The government of the Philippines shall take all necessary constitutional processes for the implementation of the entire agreement. Fourth, this agreement shall come into force with the effect from the date of its signature, done in the city of Tripoli on the 2nd Muharram 1397 corresponding to 23rd December 1976 AD, in 3 original copies in Arabic, English, French languages, all equal in legal power. Bale, Pina.
Ah.
So, good morning everyone. My name is Jovelyn L. Maupinto and I am the last reporter of Group 9. So, our lesson for today is all about federalizing the republic. So, again, we're now talking about federalism. So, when we say federalism, it is a system of government in which the same territory is controlled by two levels of government. These are the national and the local government. So generally, an overarching national government is responsible for broader governance of larger territorial areas, while the smaller subdivisions, states, and cities govern the issues of local concerns. So that's how the local and national government differs from each other. So we have here the federalizing the republic. So, the ultimate basis for a just and lasting peace in central and southern Mindanao, paper presented by Senator Aquilino Pimentel Jr. before a forum organized by the UP Department of Political Science in August 24, year of 2000. So, the proposal to adopt a federal form of government is meant primarily, first, is to provide the foundation for a just and lasting peace in central and southern Mindanao. And second is to provide an equal opportunity for the development of the regions of the country. The reason here is to counter the perception. Because if not the reality, that Metro Manila is favored over other regions in matters of development. So next, next slide, Jen. Okay. So, first we have this vital distinction. The search for a just and lasting peace in southern and central Mindanao has proven to be intractable over the last 5 centuries, where in fact, the Spanish and American colonizers had failed to bring peace to the areas. Yes, indeed. Because even our own government has not solved the recurrent Moro armed uprisings in that part of Mindanao. The reason is that the various governments have tended to oversimplify the so-called Moro problem. And that's why we have proposed superficial solutions that merely scratch the surface but do not response to the armed challenges of the Abu Sayyaf and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front is the best example of this vital distinction. So, in responding to the twin problems posed by the Abu Sayyaf and the MILF, the government has blurred the distinction, the vital one, because that divides the two groups into a gang cutthroat hooligans and the other one is the
band of armed revolutionary partisans. So the Abu Sayyaf has used its arms to pursue a criminal agenda specializing in kidnapping, murder, arson, torture, and other heinous crimes. So the MILF has used its guns to advance a political agenda, succession or independence. And practically, um, Senator Aquilino Pimentel believed that MILF call for succession or independence is merely a bargaining chip. That means it's negotiable. So next slide. So this is recognizing the difference. So if a meaningful solution is to be provided the Abu Sayyaf and the MILF challenges, then we must begin by recognizing that the two groups are different from each other and it should be treated differently because they are different, right? So the Abu Sayyaf should be dealt with as a police matter, which means that the police should go after these hoodlums hammer and tongs and bring them before the bar of justice. The second one is the MILF should be dealt with as a political matter, which means that the government should exert every effort to bring them back to the negotiating table and discuss all possible avenues that will lead to a just and lasting peace to the region that is now racked by a violent unrest. So the distinction bears underscoring because as what Senator Aquilino Pimentel even the government treats the Abu Sayyaf and the MILF as one and the same brutal gang simply because their adherents are for the most part Moros or Muslims. And as a consequences of that wrongful premise, resort to the gun primarily to overcome the problems posed by both the MILF and the Abu Sayyaf is gaining currency among the people as demonstrated by the rising popularity of the president. So next, the gunpoint policy, anathema to peace. So, there is thus a need to remind ourselves that the gun has never succeeded in establishing peace in central and southern Mindanao. The historical experience of our country bears out this conclusion. So first we have this, for almost 400 years, the Spanish government that was year 1521 to 1898. So it attempted to impose its will by force upon the Moros in Mindanao. But the problem is they failed. Another one is for almost 50 years, the American Commonwealth government that was year 1898 to 1946, they tried to do the same by forcing and bullying. But still, they didn't quit, succeeded. They still failed. So another one is the last 54 years. Our own independent government that was year 1946 to the present has been struggling to address the so-called Moro problem in central and southern Mindanao. Neither have we had much success. So, in the experience of Senator Aquilino Pimentel, he recalled the four incidents involving the government's resort to force and to counter and suppress Moro armed uprisings in central and southern Mindanao. So in all four incidents, the just and lasting peace desired by the government had failed to materialize. So first, next slide. First, we have this, the Makaling of Lanao. This is the first one in the four incidents. So, let me now elaborate in the four incidents that was stated by Senator Aquilino Pimentel. So as a boy in short pants, he remembered a ballad about the Makaling who had led a rebellion against the American regime. The reason here is to demand a different treatment for the Moros from that accorded to the rest of the people. the American government called the Makaling bandit ran after him. He killed a lot of people and crushed his rebellion. So the Makaling of Lanao is obviously is it was from Lanao in mainland Mindanao. Second here is the Kamlon Sulu. Kamlon of Sulu. This is the second of the four incidents. So Kamlon of Sulu. So as stated here by Senator Aquilino Pimentel, when he was in high school, he remembered a uprising of Kamlon against our government. Kamlon rallied his people to fight the government and assert the differences. Because if there is such a word of Muslim people, the government had to send battalion of soldiers to capture Kamlon. After the loss of so many lives and the destruction of so many properties, the government managed to capture Kamlon, imprisoned him, and ended his rebellion. And Kamlon was from Sulu. Obviously, Kamlon Sulu, so Kamlon is from Sulu. Next, we have here the Udtong Matalam. So this is the third one. For in Senator Aquilino Pimentel early years as a lawyer, he saw the eruption of another Moro rebellion in Mindanao. At that time, the armed uprising was led by Dato Udtog Matalams. So this Matalams Mindanao Independence movement said what his uprising was all about. So it was anchored mainly on his grievance that the Moros of Mindanao and consequently Mindanao itself were discriminated against by Imperial Manila. So again, the government unleashed its military might against Matalam because it was the first time we saw on the TV a live telecast showing the government howitzers shelling the rebels. And again, after the causing of the loss of several lives and destroying several properties, the government had finally neutralized the Matalam rebellion, and Matalam was from Cotabato. The next is we have Miswari of Sulu. So at the onset of Marcos martial law years, another Moro armed uprising challenged the government. This time, at that time, it was led by Miswari of the Moro National Liberation Front. So this is the last one because we have 4 incidents, so this is the last one. So here, the government tried to use force to suppress the MNLF uprising, but it did not work. It was only after the MNLF war had killed more than 100,000 people and uprooted more than 200,000 people after the MNLF war had killed more than 200,000 people in the areas of conflict that the government realized that we should talk things over, not shoot it out. With the MNLF to bring peace to central and southern Mindanao. The government then resorted to diplomacy and will to bring the MNLF to the negotiating table. Ms. Wari told to Senator Aquilino Pimentel some days ago that he is probably the only rebel leader in the world who had signed 3 peace agreements with the very government he had been fighting against. But up to this very day, he feels betrayed by the government in that he says that there are some provisions of the last peace agreement he had signed in Jakarta, that was year of 1996. So Miss Wari is from Sulu. Next is gun sprawling violence. So, unfortunately, the applicability of the government peace agreement with the MNLF notwithstanding, because the guns of rebellion in southern and central Mindanao have not been silenced and are sprawling violence as the current situation shows. So, for us, Senator Aquilino Pimentel mentioned in the previous lesson, um, there are two armed challenges still confront the government in southern and central Mindanao in the armed banditry of the Abu Sayyaf and the armed rebellion of the MNLF. So, eschewing sound analysis, the government has compounded the problem by lumping the Abu Sayyaf and the MNLF together as they are one and the same gang of cutthroats, and by deciding to meet their challenges by a single approach. First is the use of an all-out superior force to quit their uprisings. So next we have fundamental grievances. Next. So, fundamental grievances. The position of the government is only partially correct, and that is as far as the Abu Sayyaf is concerned. Certainly, not as far as the MNLF is concerned, because as discussed earlier, the two groups are miles apart in their objectives and methods of challenging the government. So moreover, the lessons of history teach us that the use of all-out force against more arms has never brought and will never bring peace to central and southern Mindanao. So we have, this is not to say that the government should sit idly by while tribal Muslim arms challenge it, because the government, of course, has the right and the duty to assert its superiority over those who challenge it by the use of force. But the use of superior government arms should only be tactical, not strategic in the matter of dealing with the more armed uprisings. Otherwise, the result of force will result only in establishing the peace of the graveyard, not the just and lasting peace that we all want for Mindanao and the rest of the country. So next we have this divide and rule policy ineffective. So, that the use of force has not solved the so-called Moro problem in Mindanao is plainly evident. Because in all the Moro uprisings that Senator Aquilino Pimentel had witnessed vicariously, or actually he had seen the government fail in bringing about just and lasting peace in central and southern Mindanao. So as pointed out earlier, that the government killed the Makaling of Lanao, subdued Kamlon of Sulu, pacified Matalam of Cotabato, and alternately warred against and talked peace with Miswari of Sulu. So a clearer case against the use of force and of the tactic of divide and rule as a policy could hardly be established. But what is abundantly clear here is that the policy of force and of divide and rule has never worked to achieve a just and lasting peace in central and southern Mindanao in the past. Neither will it work today as against the MILF. Every day, the pages of the diaries and the airlines of radio and television report killings that are obviously spawned by the violence unleashed by extremists of both sides of the war now raging in central and southern Mindanao. So next we have what then is the solution. So we have here proposed solutions. So I suggest the following steps, not me ha, that was stated by Senator Aquilino Pimentel. So first, in the short run, we have to declare a ceasefire. The second one is, at the middle run, we should negotiate with the MILF rebels and bring development to the Mindanao And the last one is, in the long run, we have to offer to the Bangsamoro a federal state of their own that will remain as a part of the Federal Republic. So, to be direct, the proposal to adopt a federal form of government for the country will establish federal states to cover the various parts of the country. So next we have these federal states. Luzon may have four federal states. First is the federal state of Northern Luzon, the federal state of Central Luzon, the federal state of Southern Tagalog, the federal state of Bicol. And we have here the Visayas may have three federal states. So there are three. First is the federal state of Eastern Visayas. Second, the federal state of Western Visayas. And the third one is the federal state of Central Visayas. So the last one we have this Mindanao may have three federal states. First one is the federal state of Northern Mindanao. Second is the federal state of Northeastern Mindanao. Third is the federal state of Bangsamoro. Next is the sharing of powers. So we have here, as for the powers of the government, the federal states may have powers over matters that are not reserved to the Federal Republic. The powers of the Federal Republic may cover, among other things, first we have this foreign affairs, next is national defense, federal taxes, customs and immigration, basic education curriculum, and basic justice. And there are also other powers which assigned to the federal states, and this including the primacy in matters of development, environment, local taxes, and police. So the enumeration is not all inclusive. In other words, the Constitution will be final repository of what power should be and of what power should be exercised by the Federal Republic itself, and those powers that should be exercised by the federal states. So the Constitution may also provide that certain powers be placed under the concurrent jurisdiction of the Federal Republic and the federal states. Whoever exercises a certain power first preludes the other from exercising it. So next we have this effect on local governments. So the question here is, what will happen to the local governments if the federal form now is adopted? So the answer is, it depends on the way the Constitution would deal with the matter. If the Constitution would empower federal states to deal with the local government units as they please, then the present structures and powers of the provinces, cities, municipalities, and barangays may be modified, retained, or altogether abolished by the federal states. Next is revision of the Constitution. So, revision of the Constitution. It is important to state that the adoption of the federal form of the government needs the revision of the Constitution. And that, to Senator Aquilino Pimentel mind, is the hardest obstacle that we have to overcome. Because people are wary of attempts to amend or revise the Constitution. Thus, it is safe to assume that even if we are able to get the Senate to agree to push for the adoption of a federal form of government, it will take a lot of time because it will take a lot of time before that can realistically be achieved. So next we have this benefits of federalization. Next. So, before we leave the matter of this federalism, the adoption of the federal form of the government would enable the Bangsamoro a fuller opportunity to promote their own identity and culture and their own economic development at their own pace without the need of seceding or declaring their independence from the republic. And he hopes that the federalization of the republic will lead to a just and lasting peace in the provinces and cities of central and southern Mindanao, which will compose the federal state of Bangsamoro. So the adoption of the federal form of the government would likewise address the concerns of the rest of the country that their respective development efforts are being thwarted by the bias shown by the Manila bias bureaucrats in favor of what is now popularly called Imperial Manila. So in their own federal states, the state governments, including that of the Bangsamoro, would have greater leeway to plan, push for, fund, and implement projects that will speed up the development of their own regions. So next we have this living together as neighbors. So the fact that in those communities, Muslims and Christians live together as neighbors without killing one another shows that indeed no religious divide categorizes our people into irreconcilable hostile blocks. So it is true that violence occasionally wreck the serenity of other communities where Muslims and Christians live side by side, as in Marawi City, Basilan, and Sulu, where Muslims predominate. But it is also true that one has yet to hear of the Muslim majority oppressing the Christian minority in the Tawi-Tawi, unless that is the best kept secret in this country. So the last one is we have here this our father Abraham. So according as what I've stated by Senator Aquilino Pimentel, um, he is most optimistic that sooner or later daw the Christians and the Muslims of this country will realize that we belong to one country and are descended from one and the same father, Abraham, and that our two religions, instead of separating us, should bind us to the same supreme being and lead us to respect one another. After all, Muslims do proclaim that Islam is a religion of peace, and all Christians believe that Christianity is a religion of love. If that be so, and there is no reason to doubt that it is so. It is only a question of time before we will be embracing one another as a children of the same God and as brothers and sisters of the same race and the same nation. So we pray with all our heart that we will go that decision before more lives are lost and things gets worse. That's all. Thank you.